Right, let's get talking. Right now, I'm going to read some information on the slave trade that you otherwise probably would not read yourselves because you likely don't know to even look for this information. Okay, so I'm going to read it, then I'll show you the title of this essay. The Portuguese, within 2 centuries after its suppression in Europe, in imitation of those piracies which we have shown to have existed in the uncivilized ages of the world, made their descents on Africa, and committing depredations on the coast, carried the wretched inhabitants into slavery. This practice, however trifling and partial it might appear at first, soon became serious and general, a melancholy instance of the depravity of human nature, as it shews that neither the laws nor religion of any country, however excellent in the forms of each, are sufficient to bind the consciences of some, but there are always men of every age, country, and persuasion who are ready to sacrifice their dearest principles at the shrine of gain. Our own ancestors, together with the Spaniards, French, and most of the maritime powers of Europe, soon followed the piratical example, and thus did the Europeans, to their eternal infamy, renew a custom which their own ancestors had so lately exploded from a conscientiousness of its impiety. The unfortunate Africans, terrified at these repeated depredations, fled in confusion from the coast and sought in the interior parts of the country a retreat from the persecution of their invaders. But alas, they were miserably disappointed. There are few retreats that can escape the penetrating eye of avarice. The Europeans still pursued them. They entered their rivers, sailed up into the heart of the country, surprised the unfortunate Africans again, and carried them into slavery. But this conduct, though successful at first, defeated afterwards its own ends. It created a more general alarm and pointed out at the same instant the best method of security from future depredations. The banks of the rivers were accordingly deserted, as the coast had been before, and thus were the Christian invaders left without a prospect of their prey. In this situation, however, expedients were not wanting. They now formed to themselves the resolution of settling in the country, of securing themselves by fortified posts, of changing their system of force into that of pretended liberality, and of opening by every species of bribery and corruption a communication with the natives. These plans were put into immediate execution. The Europeans erected their forts, landed their merchandise, and endeavored by a peaceable deportment, by presents, and by every appearance of munificence to seduce the attachments and confidence of the Africans. These schemes had the desired effect. The gaudy trappings of European art not only caught their attention but excited their curiosity. They dazzled the eyes and bewitched the senses, not only of those to whom they were given, but those to whom they were shown. Thus followed a speedy intercourse with each other, and a confidence highly favorable to the views of avarice or ambition. It was now time for the Europeans to embrace the opportunity which, which this intercourse had thus afforded them, of carrying their schemes into execution and of fixing them on such a permanent foundation as should secure them future success. They had already discovered the different interviews obtained the chiefs of the African tribes. They paid their court before to these. They paid their court therefore to these, and so completely intoxicated their senses with the luxuries which they brought from home as to be able to seduce them to their desirings, to their desings, to their maybe they mean designs, desings. A treaty of peace and commerce was immediately concluded. Uh, it was agreed that the kings, on their part, should from this period sentence prisoners of war and convicts to European servitude, and that the Europeans should supply them in return with the luxuries of the North. This agreement immediately took place, and thus began that commerce which makes so considerable a figure at the present day. But happy had the Africans been if those only had who had been justly convicted of crimes or taken in a just war had been sentenced to the severities of servitude. How many of those miseries which afterwards attended them had been never known, and how would their history have saved those sighs and emotions of pity which must now ever accompany its perusal? The Europeans, on the establishment of their western colonies, required a greater number of slaves than a strict adherence to the treaty could produce. The princes therefore had only the choice of relinquishing the commerce. So that is from, you go back, so I can show you who wrote this. It's from Thomas Clarkson, 1760 to 1846, an essay on the slavery and commerce of the human species, particularly the African, translated from a Latin dissertation, which was honored with the first prize in the University of Cambridge for the year 1785 with additions. And so Thomas Clarkson Thomas Clarkson was an English abolitionist and a leading campaigner against the slave trade in the British Empire. He helped found the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade and helped achieve passage of the Slave Trade Act 1807, which ended British trade in slaves. So that's that. And then you also have something else you will not be pointed to. Go here. If I can find it. It said, okay, this is a letter on the abolition of the slave trade addressed to blah, blah, blah. The discerning natives accounted their greatest unhappiness that they were ever visited by Europeans. They say that we Christians introduced the traffic of slaves, and that before our coming they lived in peace. Uh, Again, William Wilberforce. Okay, this is written in 1807. Read the same thing. The discerning natives accounted their greatest unhappiness that they were ever visited by Europeans. They say that we Christians introduced the traffic of slaves, and that before our coming they lived in peace. This is someone who repeats itself. The African slave trade, Rufus Wheelwright Clark. Is there anything about that? If I type in, what do I get? If I type in we stole Africans. Let's see what comes up. Okay, go here to tools. Go down here to where it says any time. Go down to 19th century. If I put on stole the Africans. I don't know where it's. Sometimes it will break things up. Oh, here we go. Little folk of many lands. Louise Jordan Mill. It says here, we have on the whole treated the blacks whom we stole from Africa far better than we have treated the cinnamon. I don't know what. So they, anyways, they're saying that stole blacks from Africa. About. Do I type in? Maybe it wasn't saying anything here. Da, da, da. This is talking about least. Okay, the good English ship took me from the bad slave ship and made me to go afraid. Okay, which is okay. History of the colonization of the United States. From 1680 to 1700, the English took from Africa about